I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The order did not arrive with a public ceremony, a televised address, or the sound of cheering crowds. It came behind closed doors, carried inside a crimson folder, and placed directly before King Charles. What followed was more than a change of wording. With one controlled signature, the monarch commanded that Meghan's HRH styling be erased from active royal archives, transforming an old family wound into an irreversible act of royal separation. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles summoned a senior archivist and 2 constitutional advisors into a restricted room inside Buckingham Palace, and none mistook the silence for calm. Beside his chair waited a prepared directive, marked for signature. The HRH styling, meaning the formal words, Her Royal Highness, used to show official royal rank, would no longer appear beside Meghan's name in active palace records. Every ceremonial index, internal biography, protocol directory, and future archival display had to be amended. The decision was exact, deliberate, and far larger than one page. The king read the final paragraph twice. His hand remained above the paper because he understood what the signature would admit. Meghan had entered the family under celebration, promise, and hope. Now she would be separated from its living record by the institution that had welcomed her. Charles did not look triumphant. He looked wounded. Camilla watched him set down the pen and recognized the truth. This was not simple punishment. The monarch was accepting that reconciliation had failed. The archivist opened a supporting file and explained that the order would also affect older digital entries. Royal archives are the records through which the palace preserves names, duties, titles, and events for future use, and the active database still carried Meghan's styling in several places. Those references would now be changed, so HRH no longer appeared as a current designation. Charles listened without interruption, but Camilla saw his jaw tighten when the scale of the removal became clear. Then the room changed. The archivist lifted a second sealed instruction from the crimson folder, and Charles stopped him before it could be opened. William had not arrived. The king ordered that no one touch the document until the prince entered, revealing that Meghan's archival removal was only the first stage of something larger. As the signed directive left under guard, a message reached Meghan in California. She read it twice, and her shock hardened into anger. But while the palace began removing 3 letters from its records, the people bound to those letters were preparing to defend everything they believed those letters still represented. To the public, HRH appeared to be nothing more than a formal styling attached to a royal name. To Meghan, it represented the moment she crossed the palace threshold and became part of an ancient institution. To Harry, it remained tied to the life he had lost. To William, it symbolized duties they had abandoned. And to Charles, those 3 letters had become the most painful evidence of a family promise that had collapsed. Meghan had received the styling when she entered the royal family through marriage. HRH means Her Royal Highness, a formal mark showing that someone belongs to the senior royal structure and represents the crown. Agreeing not to use it publicly had already created distance, but removing it from active archives felt different. It suggested that the palace was no longer merely limiting her role, it was redefining how that role would be remembered. Meghan stood beside the kitchen counter when the message arrived. She read the words, "Archival Amendment," then gripped the edge as disbelief hardened into humiliation. Harry entered moments later, saw her face change, and understood before she spoke. To her, the palace had crossed a line. To him, the decision threatened the last connection between his present life and the world he had left behind. She insisted the title had been granted on her wedding day, and could not be treated as though it had never existed. Meghan demanded to know whether the ceremony records, official portraits, and signed programs would also be changed. Harry listened as her anger rose, then promised he would confront the family directly. The issue was no longer 3 letters. It was identity, memory, and who controlled the story of their place inside the monarchy. In London, William faced Charles with the same question from another direction. The prince accepted that removing an active designation could protect institutional consistency, meaning the palace would use the same rules for everyone who no longer served officially. But altering historical descriptions, he warned, could appear punitive. The king heard the challenge and stiffened. William had supported firm boundaries, yet he refused to let anger become policy. The disagreement struck deeper, because each man feared a different loss. Charles feared his reign would be weakened by endless exceptions. William feared the future monarchy would inherit a record shaped by resentment. Across the ocean, Harry remembered the private palace confrontation that had changed his father's attitude months earlier, a night no one outside the family was ever meant to know. And as Harry returned to that bitter memory, the true cause of the king's decision began to emerge from a night the palace had tried desperately to bury. The order had not begun inside an archive. It began months earlier at Windsor Castle, during a private reception intended to calm tensions before they hardened forever. Charles had offered one final path back: discretion, mutual restraint, and respect for the crown's boundaries. But before the evening ended, Meghan made a demand that stunned the room. Harry defended her without hesitation, and the king realized that the family was no longer arguing about titles. They were fighting over authority. Charles had arranged the reception after months of strained messages and failed attempts at compromise. He hoped to establish clear rules for future family appearances and references to royal status before every reunion became another public crisis. A private reception meant a closed royal gathering without press or official ceremony, and only Camilla, William, Harry, and Meghan joined him. No advisor could carry the blame. Every person in that room would own what happened next. Meghan spoke first. She demanded written confirmation that she could still be identified as HRH in historical exhibitions, charitable biographies, and all future material connected to her royal wedding. The styling meant Her Royal Highness, the formal mark of senior royal standing, and she viewed it as part of the identity granted when she married into the family. Charles answered that history would remain untouched, but active privilege could not survive without active service. She pushed back, insisting her contribution could not be rewritten simply because she had challenged the institution. Harry rose from his chair. He accused William of supporting a system that wanted his wife remembered only on palace terms, and the prince stood in response. The future king warned his brother not to turn a constitutional issue into a personal attack. Constitutional authority meant the rules governing how the crown uses titles and power, yet the explanation did nothing to cool the anger. Charles watched both sons face each other and understood that the argument had moved beyond language. It had become a struggle over control. Meghan then placed a prepared list of archival demands on the table. The document proved the request had been planned before the meeting and was not an emotional reaction. Charles folded it once, gave no answer, and quietly instructed his private secretary through a documented written note to review every remaining use of her HRH styling. The review stayed secret until Meghan sent a final recorded message insisting the palace recognize her royal rank permanently. Charles listened twice, then summoned her and Harry for one last confrontation. The reception had planted the decision, but it would take one final meeting and one sentence spoken directly to the king to make him carry it out. No advisors sat between them. No cameras softened their expressions. When Meghan entered the private palace chamber with Harry beside her, Charles remained standing near the table, the unsigned archival directive hidden inside a folder behind him. She had come expecting negotiation. He had prepared a boundary. And within minutes, years of resentment erupted into a direct confrontation between a woman determined to preserve her royal identity and a monarch convinced that the crown could no longer survive endless compromise. Charles had deliberately removed every aide from the chamber. He wanted no official witness, no courtier, and no advisor translating pain into policy. An archival directive was a formal order telling palace record keepers how names, titles, and official references must appear. The king told Meghan that royal styling existed through service, representation, and trust, not marriage alone. She heard a rule. He meant a final warning. Meghan leaned forward and said removing HRH from active archives would reduce her years inside the monarchy to an inconvenience the palace wished to correct. Harry moved his chair closer to her and told his father that punishing her name would not restore the family. Charles answered without raising his voice. Silence had not restored it either. The room tightened around them. Years of private hurt now sat between all three, and none could pretend the argument concerned only palace language. Meghan held his gaze. "Are you erasing my title because I left, or because I spoke?" Charles closed the folder. He said he was ending the contradiction between royal status and the rejection of royal responsibility. HRH meant Her Royal Highness, a styling that signaled formal standing within the crown, and he would not allow that signal to survive without duty behind it. Then Charles disclosed the most dangerous detail through a recorded summary prepared after the Windsor reception. Meghan's demand for permanent HRH recognition had circulated beyond the family, creating fears that the styling could be used commercially or politically in future ventures. Harry demanded to see the evidence. The king refused. He said the issue was no longer one private message, but a pattern the crown could not ignore. That refusal deepened Harry's suspicion, but it also showed him his father had already moved beyond negotiation. Meghan stood first. She told Charles that history would judge whether he had protected the monarchy or wounded his own family to save its image. Then she left. Harry remained long enough to hear one final blow. William would help decide how far the order reached. The confrontation ended with a door closing between father and son, but beyond that door, William was waiting to decide whether the order would become restraint or erasure. Charles possessed the authority to sign the order, but William understood what would happen after the ink dried. Every removed reference would one day belong to the reign he was expected to inherit. The prince could support a firm boundary. He could not support rewriting the past. As father and son examined the directive together, the deepest question was no longer whether Meghan would lose the styling. It was whether the monarchy would lose its own integrity while removing it. William entered the archive office, carrying a marked copy of the directive, every disputed line underlined. As heir, meaning the person expected to become the next monarch, he held no final authority over Charles's present decision, but his influence over the future crown could not be ignored. The king controlled current royal protocol, the rules governing official titles, and palace representation. His son would inherit the consequences. The prince placed one page before Charles and spoke with controlled force. He would support removing Meghan's active HRH status from current palace material, but he would not support deleting proof that she had once legitimately held it. HRH meant Her Royal Highness, a formal styling connected to senior royal standing. William argued that the crown could end its present use without pretending the past had never happened. Charles stiffened. He accused his son of protecting appearances after years of attacks against the family. William did not retreat. He warned that anger could not become archival policy, because records shaped by resentment would weaken the monarchy more deeply than any public criticism. The king heard the challenge. The future king heard the pain beneath his father's frustration. William then proposed the dividing line. Historical documents would remain untouched, but all current directories, future exhibitions, official biographies, protocol lists, and ceremonial references would omit Meghan's styling. Camilla entered during the final exchange and urged Charles to appear decisive. Yet after reading the amended clause, the Queen Consort quietly agreed that history could not be falsified simply to make a boundary look stronger. Silence settled over the page. Charles took up his pen, drew a hard line through the words, "all historical references," and replaced them with, "all active and future institutional references." An institutional reference meant any official palace record produced for present or later public use. The monarch passed the amended directive back to William. Neither man smiled. The compromise saved the historical record, but it could not stop the order's immediate force. Hours before publication, Meghan's name vanished from a forthcoming royal exhibition catalogue. William had saved the past from being rewritten, but he could not prevent the present from changing, and the first visible consequence was already moving through the palace presses. The decision became real, not when Charles signed the document, But when Meghan saw her altered name in print, a forthcoming royal exhibition catalogue once identified her by the styling granted on her wedding day. Hours before publication, the line was changed. The 3 letters vanished. Nothing else moved. Nothing else needed to. To palace officials, it was a protocol correction. To Meghan, it was the first public proof that the institution had begun separating her identity from its own. Archive staff moved quickly through palace databases, ceremonial indexes, biographical summaries, and materials still waiting for publication. A ceremonial index is an official list used to record royal names, titles, and appearances connected to formal events. William's amendment protected every signed historical record, so the past would remain intact. But from that moment forward, no active or newly produced royal source would identify Meghan as HRH. Meghan opened the digital proof and searched for her name. She found it without the styling, enlarged the line, and read it again. Then again. Her hand froze over the keyboard before she closed the laptop without speaking. Harry entered, saw the silence in her face, and asked whether she wanted him to call Charles. She shook her head. This was no longer about one conversation, she said. It was about the palace proving it could redefine her without her consent. Meghan crossed to a drawer and removed an old wedding program. Beneath her name sat the formal title, once announced with celebration and promise. She touched the printed words and remembered how quickly welcome had become distance. Harry watched her, trapped between anger for his wife and grief for the family he still could not completely release. Their legal advisor delivered a warning through a documented private consultation. Challenging the archival policy could expose correspondence from the Windsor reception, including Meghan's prepared demands for permanent recognition. Harry then received a separate palace notice stating that his own place in future records was under review. Charles was no longer examining marriage alone. The king appeared ready to separate royal birth from active institutional representation, meaning official recognition tied to present service rather than blood. The notice carried no accusation, yet its meaning was unmistakable. The same rule used against Meghan could soon be turned toward the king's son. The threat should have triggered another public attack. Instead, Meghan made an unexpected choice. She asked Harry to speak with his father alone, without lawyers, advisors, or William present. For the first time since the order was signed, Meghan did not demand another statement. She demanded one private conversation that might either save Harry's bond with his father or destroy it completely. Harry entered the room without Meghan, and Charles waited without the Crown's advisors. There were no folders on the table, no legal arguments prepared, and no officials ready to translate pain into protocol. For once, they faced each other simply as father and son. The order could not be undone. Both men understood that. But beneath the fight over titles remained a more devastating question. Had Charles erased Meghan's royal styling to protect the monarchy, or because he no longer knew how to reach his child? Harry had accepted Meghan's request and come alone to Clarence House. The residence mattered because it was Charles's private London home, not a formal palace chamber shaped by officials and procedure. No institutional figure stood nearby to control the exchange. The son admitted that HRH was not being actively used, but removing it from future royal references felt like a declaration that his marriage no longer belonged inside the family story. Charles listened, then answered with grief he had hidden behind authority. He said watching Harry defend every demand, while rejecting every condition, made him feel his son wanted the emotional privileges of family without accepting any boundaries. Harry did not look away. He told his father that Meghan had experienced every restriction as proof she had never truly been accepted. The king heard the words, and finally understood that the same events had lived as protection in his memory, and rejection in hers. Charles reached toward a nearby photograph of Harry's wedding and placed it between them. He said the day would never be removed from the archive or from his memory, even though the title attached to its future meaning had changed. An archive is the official record preserving royal events, names, and documents for history. The monarch then disclosed, through the written amendment William had submitted, that the prince personally prevented historical references from being altered. Harry froze. For years, he had believed his brother wanted Meghan erased completely. That revelation weakened the anger he had carried into the room. He agreed not to challenge the order legally and not to release the Windsor correspondence. Charles, in return, promised that her actual service, wedding, and place in the family's history would remain accurately preserved. The compromise restored no title and healed no old wound. Yet it stopped pain from becoming open warfare for everyone watching from outside. Instead of leaked letters and legal threats, the public would receive one stark palace announcement and decide what the decision meant. Father and son left without embracing, yet they had stopped the private wound from becoming a public war. Just as the announcement reached the streets beyond the palace gates. By sunrise, the decision was no longer confined to palace databases. It was printed across front pages, repeated on morning broadcasts, and debated outside royal gates. Some saw Charles finally defending the meaning of service. Others saw a monarch striking a woman who had already walked away. Yet one image captured the national mood more powerfully than any argument. Meghan's wedding portrait displayed beside a newspaper headline declaring that the title beneath her name had now been removed. The palace issued a carefully worded statement confirming that Meghan's HRH styling would disappear from all active and future official references, while historical records remained unchanged. HRH means Her Royal Highness, a formal styling showing recognized royal status. Broadcasters explained that old documents would still record her past, but new institutional material would no longer carry the title. That distinction turned archive language into a national argument about duty, identity, and belonging. Outside Buckingham Palace, a newspaper vendor lifted a front page above the crowd. 3 letters gone filled the page beside Meghan's wedding portrait, and tourists gathered beneath the balcony to photograph the headline against the royal residence. The moment spread within minutes. One broadcaster called the order Charles's clearest attempt to separate family connection from royal duty. Another described it as a symbolic divorce between Meghan and the crown. William watched the coverage from Kensington Palace and felt unease tighten in his chest. Commentators called the move historical erasure, even though the prince had fought to prevent the past from being rewritten. An institutional reference means any official palace material created for current or future use, and he knew the limit mattered. Yet the public heard removal before it heard restraint. Meghan refused to appear publicly that morning. Harry read the statement alone and recognized the exact compromise he had discussed with Charles. Her marriage remained untouched, her place in past royal events remained recorded, and her family relationships had not been changed. Only the crown's formal endorsement in present and future usage had ended. The wording offered accuracy, but it carried no warmth. For Harry, that cold precision proved peace had been secured only by accepting a permanent emotional separation. Outrage slowly gave way to understanding, though not forgiveness. Charles prepared one final internal message, explaining why the decision had been necessary and what it would mean for every royal title that followed. The king knew this was no longer only about Meghan. It was about the rules his family would live under after him. The headlines had judged the action before understanding its limits, but the king's final message would reveal that Meghan was not the only person being addressed. The entire monarchy was. In the end, Charles did not erase Meghan from history. He did something colder, narrower, and more final. He removed the crown's continuing recognition from the identity she carried into the future. Her wedding remained. Her service remained. Her conflicts, departure, and place within the royal family remained. But HRH would no longer follow her through official palace records. The monarchy had drawn its boundary, and everyone involved was forced to accept that some separations cannot be softened without becoming meaningless. Charles circulated a final internal memorandum through the palace offices. The document stated that royal titles must reflect present responsibility, public service, and accountability, rather than survive forever without institutional duty. A memorandum is a formal written message used to explain an official decision. The king made the boundary unmistakable. Historical truth would remain protected, but active royal recognition would end when a working relationship with the crown had permanently ended. Meghan read the final wording alone. She understood that the palace had not denied her wedding, her service, or the years she had spent inside the monarchy. It had closed the door on her future royal identity. She folded the printed statement carefully and placed it beside her old wedding program, where the styling still appeared beneath her name. The contrast carried more pain than any public argument. Harry accepted that another legal challenge would reopen wounds without rebuilding trust. He chose Meghan, their present life, and the family they had created, rather than another public fight with Charles. The son did not forgive everything. The father had not repaired everything. Yet both men understood that peace sometimes begins with refusing to cause more damage. Charles later entered the archive room at Buckingham Palace and opened the newly amended index. An index is the official guide used to locate names and events within royal records. The monarch paused when he reached Meghan's entry. He did not remove the wedding record. He did not erase her service. Instead, he closed the volume and returned it to the archivist. William's intervention became the moral center of the outcome. Meghan's legitimate history remained recorded, but HRH no longer operated as a living royal privilege. The prince had protected truth while allowing the crown to defend its rules. The decision strengthened the monarchy's link between status and service, but its human cost was permanent. Charles's order was neither revenge nor reconciliation. It was the final acknowledgement that the relationship had changed beyond repair. And when the archive volume closed, the verdict was complete. Meghan's past could never be erased, but the crown had decisively ended its claim over her future, and hers over the title it once gave her. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.